The crystal-clear water turned murky brown as the last brick sank to the bottom with a hollow thud. Sarah Martinez stared at her destroyed pool, disbelief etched across her face. While her neighbor, Margaret Thornfield, stood at the fence line, with a satisfied smirk, you should have thought twice before denying the HOA president access to community amenities, Margaret called out, her voice dripping with vindictive triumph. But what Margaret didn't know was that Sarah's security cameras had captured everything, and the footage would soon reveal a truth that would shatter more than just pool tiles. Sometimes the most devastating revenge comes not from what you plan, but from what the morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine backyard of 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, as Sarah Martinez adjusted the final pool float, a flamingo-pink unicorn that her 8-year-old daughter Sophia had insisted was absolutely necessary for proper pool enjoyment. The infinity pool sparkled like a jewel against the backdrop of their Spanish-style home, its LED lights creating an ethereal blue glow even in daylight. Sarah stepped back, admiring her work. 3 years of saving, planning, and construction had led to this moment, the first official pool party of the summer. She'd invited the entire neighborhood, a gesture of goodwill that she hoped would smooth over any lingering tensions from the construction process. "Mom, when are the Hendersons coming over?" Sophia called from the sliding glass door, her arms wrapped around a stack of pool noodles that threatened to topple over at any moment. "In about an hour, sweetheart. Why don't you help me set up the snack table?" As Sarah began arranging the outdoor furniture, she noticed a familiar figure approaching from the direction of the HOA office building. Margaret Thornfield, the newly elected president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, strode across the manicured lawn with the purposeful gait of someone who considered herself the neighborhood's unofficial sheriff. Margaret was a woman, in her early 50s, who had moved to Maple Ridge 2 years ago and immediately made it her mission to restore order and property values to what she deemed a declining community. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes impeccably pressed, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Sarah, dear," Margaret called out, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness that Sarah had learned to recognize as a warning signal. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by." "Of course not, Margaret. Actually, perfect timing. I was just about to send out a reminder about the pool party. You're welcome to join us this afternoon." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's actually what I wanted to discuss with you." She paused at the wrought iron gate that separated Sarah's backyard from the common walking path. "I've been reviewing the HOA bylaws, and I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about your pool." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "According to Section 4.2 of the Community Guidelines, any recreational amenity that exceeds the standard property allowance must be made available for community use during designated hours." Margaret pulled out a leather-bound folder and flipped through several pages with practiced efficiency. "Your pool, given its size and the fact that it's visible from the common areas, falls under this category." "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, causing Sophia to look up from where she was organizing pool toys. "This is my backyard, Margaret. I paid for this pool with my own money, on my own property. I understand your confusion, dear, but the rules are quite clear. The pool must be available for community use from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekends and 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays. It's for the greater good of the neighborhood." Sarah stared at Margaret, wondering if she was being "Are you seriously telling me that I have to let strangers use my pool? Not strangers, neighbors, community members, people who contribute to the property values that make your investment worthwhile." Margaret's voice took on a patronizing tone. "I know it seems like a big adjustment, but think about it as an opportunity to foster community spirit." "No," the word came out harder than Sarah intended. "Absolutely not. This is my home, my property, and my pool. I didn't spend my life saving so that every person in the neighborhood could treat my backyard like a public swimming facility." Margaret's expression hardened. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. The bylaws are binding, and as HOA president, I have the authority to enforce them." "Show me the exact bylaw," Sarah demanded, crossing her arms. "And I want to see where it specifically mentions pools." Margaret hesitated for a moment, then closed the folder with a sharp snap. "The language is quite technical, but I assure you it's legitimate. I'll have our legal team send you the official documentation." "Legal team? Sarah almost laughed. Margaret, this is a suburban HOA, not a Fortune 500 company. What legal team? The one that will be handling your violations if you choose to. Be uncooperative. Margaret's mask of pleasantness was rapidly slipping. I had hoped we could resolve this amicably, but I can see you're going to make this difficult. Sarah felt a surge of anger that she hadn't experienced since her divorce proceedings 2 years earlier. The only thing that's difficult here is your ridiculous interpretation of community guidelines. I'm not opening my pool to the neighborhood, and that's final. We'll see about that, Margaret said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. After that, we'll be forced to take action. As Margaret turned to leave, Sarah called after her. What kind of action? Margaret paused and looked back over her shoulder, the kind that protects the community from selfish residents who put their own interests above the collective good. After Margaret disappeared around the corner, Sarah stood in her backyard, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. She'd moved to Maple Ridge specifically because it was supposed to be a peaceful, family-friendly neighborhood. The HOA fees were reasonable, the streets were clean, and the crime rates were low. She'd never imagined that owning a pool would somehow make her a target for neighborhood politics. Mom, was that lady yelling at you? Sophia had wandered over, still clutching her pool noodles. She wasn't yelling, sweetheart. She was just ... confused about some rules. She seemed mean. Sarah knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. Some people get a little too excited about being in charge. But don't worry about it, okay? Today is about having fun with our friends. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah tried to push the encounter with Margaret out of her mind. The Hendersons arrived right on time, followed by the Patels, the Johnsons, and several other families from the neighborhood. The kids splashed in the pool while the adults gathered around the outdoor kitchen, sharing stories and enjoying the warm weather. This is incredible, Sarah, commented Janet Henderson, a single mother who lived 3 houses down. I can't believe you built all this yourself. Well, I had help from some very expensive contractors, Sarah laughed, but it was worth every penny. Sophia's been asking for a pool since she was 5. I heard Margaret stop by earlier, said David Johnson, lowering his voice slightly. Everything okay? Sarah glanced around to make sure the kids weren't listening. She seems to think the HOA has some claim on my pool. Something about community. Amenities. That's ridiculous, Janet said. Since when do HOAs get to dictate what homeowners do with their own backyards? Since Margaret Thornfield decided she was the queen of Maple Ridge, David muttered, she's been making life difficult for a lot of people lately. The Garcias got a violation notice because their lawn was apparently half an inch too tall. Half an inch. Sarah stared at him. That's insane. She's on a power trip, Janet added. My friend lives in Sunset Heights, and she said their HOA president is actually helpful, organizes block parties, negotiates better deals with service providers, stuff like that. Margaret just seems to enjoy making people miserable. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Sarah found herself standing alone in her backyard, watching the pool lights create dancing patterns on the water's surface. The conversation with Margaret replayed in her mind, each word feeling more absurd than the last. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Tom Bradford, a lawyer who had helped her with her divorce. If Margaret wanted to play legal games, Sarah would make sure she understood the rules. Tom, it's Sarah Martinez. I know it's late, but I have a situation I need to discuss with you. Sarah, good to hear from you. What's going on? Sarah explained the encounter with Margaret, the supposed bylaw violations, and the threats of legal action. Tom listened without interrupting, occasionally making small notes. Okay, he said when she finished. First thing, do you have a copy of your HOA bylaws? Somewhere in my home office. I think I got them when I bought the house, but I honestly never read them carefully. That's normal. Most people don't. But here's the thing, HOA bylaws have to be very specific about what they can and can't regulate. They can't just make up rules retroactively, especially about something as major as forcing you to open your private property to community use. So Margaret is lying. Not necessarily lying, but possibly misinterpreting or stretching the truth. HOAs do have some authority, but it's limited. They can't force. Sarah woke to the sound of her doorbell ringing incessantly at 6:47 a.m. She stumbled out of bed, threw on a robe, and peered through the peephole to see a man in a county inspector's uniform standing on her porch, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Martinez, I'm here about a complaint filed regarding unpermitted construction and potential safety violations." Sarah's blood ran cold. She opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain lock. "I'm sorry, what complaint? Pool installation without proper permits, potential electrical hazards, and violation of setback requirements. I need to conduct an inspection of your backyard immediately. Can I see some identification, please?" The inspector, a man with tired eyes, held up his county ID badge. "Look, ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Someone filed a formal complaint yesterday, and I have to investigate. The sooner we get this done, the sooner I can get out of your hair." Sarah's hands shook. As she unchained the door, "All my permits are on file. I have copies of everything. That's what we're here to verify." As the inspector walked through her backyard, methodically checking pool equipment and measuring distances from property lines, Sarah called her contractor, Miguel Santos, who had built the pool. "Miguel, I need you to come over immediately. The county is here doing an inspection because someone filed a complaint." "What? That's impossible. Everything was done to code. Sarah, I've been building pools for 15 years. I don't cut corners, I know, but they're here anyway. Can you bring all the documentation? I'll be there in 20 minutes. While waiting for Miguel, Sarah watched the inspector examine her pool equipment with growing anxiety. Everything looked perfect to her, same equipment that had passed the original inspections without any issues. "Find anything wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The inspector looked up from his notes. "Your electrical setup is actually better than code requires. Whoever installed this knew what they were doing." He paused, studying his clipboard. "To be honest, this complaint doesn't make much sense. Usually, when we get calls about unpermitted pools, there are obvious violations. This is one of the cleanest installations I've seen, so there's no problem. Not that I can see, but I still have to file a report." He looked at her with something approaching sympathy. "Between you and me, this feels like a neighbor dispute rather than a legitimate safety concern. You might want to think about who might have a grudge against you." Sarah didn't need to think very hard. After the inspector left, Miguel arrived with a folder full of documentation. "This is harassment," he said, flipping through permit copies. "Every single thing we did was approved in advance. The electrical, the plumbing, the structural work, all of it." "Margaret Thornfield is trying to force me to open my pool to the neighborhood," Sarah explained. "When I refused, she threatened to take action." Miguel's expression darkened. "I've dealt with her before. She tried to get the Patel family cited for their driveway expansion last year, claimed it violated HOA guidelines even though they had proper permits. What happened? The Patels fought it and won, but it cost them thousands in legal fees. Margaret doesn't care if she's right or wrong. She just wants to exhaust people until they give up." Sarah felt a surge of anger. "She's not going to exhaust me." As Miguel left, Sarah noticed Mrs. Henderson from next door watering her garden. She walked over to the fence that separated their properties. "Janet, did you hear about the county inspection this morning?" Janet looked up, her face troubled. "I saw the truck. What was that about? Someone filed a complaint about my pool? Permits." The inspector said it was probably motivated by a neighbor dispute. "Oh no." Janet set down her watering can. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Margaret came by yesterday afternoon asking questions about your pool party. She wanted to know who was here, how many people, whether you were charging admission." "Charging admission. It was a neighborhood barbecue." "I know that, but she seemed to think you were running some kind of business. She also asked about the noise levels and whether any children were unsupervised in the pool." Sarah stared at her neighbor. "She's building a case against me. It gets worse. She went to the Johnsons' house, too, and the Garcias. She's asking everyone on the block to document any disturbances related to your pool. This is insane. I invited everyone. You all had a great time." "We did, but Margaret is spinning it differently. She's telling people that you're creating a public nuisance and that property values will suffer if the neighborhood becomes known for unregulated pool parties." Sarah felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. "What am I supposed to do? Never use my own pool?" "Fight back," Janet said firmly. "Most of us like you, Sarah. We're not going to let Margaret bully you out of your own backyard. That afternoon, Sarah received an official letter from the Maple Ridge HOA. The letterhead looked professional, complete with a logo and legal-sounding language that made her stomach churn. Dear Ms. Martinez, this letter serves as formal notice that your property at 1247 Maple Ridge, Dr. Drive, is in violation of the following community guidelines. 1. Installation of recreational amenities without HOA approval. Section 4.22. Hosting gatherings that exceed the maximum occupancy limits for residential properties. Section 7.13. Creation of noise disturbances during designated quiet hours. Section 8.3. 4. Failure to provide community access to amenities that affect neighborhood property values. Section 4.2. You have 72 hours to remedy these violations or face fines of $500 per day per violation. Additionally, the HOA reserves the right to pursue legal action to enforce compliance. For the betterment of our community. Margaret Thornfield. HOA President Sarah read the letter 3 times, her disbelief growing with each reading. She immediately called Tom Bradford. Tom, I just got the most ridiculous letter from the HOA. They're threatening to fine me $2,000 a day for having a pool party. Read me the exact language, Tom said, his voice all business. Sarah went through each violation, her voice rising with indignation. When she finished, there was a long pause. Sarah, I need you to do something right now. Go to your computer and print out every single document related to your HOA, the original bylaws, any amendments, your purchase agreement, everything. Then scan them and email them to me. Why? What's wrong? Those section numbers don't match the standard HOA bylaw format. More importantly, some of those violations are legally meaningless. HOAs can't regulate maximum occupancy for private gatherings on private property, and they definitely can't force you to provide community access to your pool. So she's making this up. It's starting to look that way. But here's the thing even. If she's wrong, fighting bogus HOA violations can be expensive and time-consuming. That's probably what she's counting on. Sarah spent the next 2 hours digging through her home office, finding every document related to her HOA membership. As she read through the actual bylaws, her confusion turned to anger. The sections Margaret had cited either didn't exist or said something completely different from what was claimed in the letter. Section 4.2, which supposedly required community access to recreational amenities, was actually about maintaining common areas like playgrounds and walking paths. Section 7.1 dealt with commercial activities, not private gatherings. Section 8.3 was about construction noise during weekday hours. Margaret had either completely misunderstood the bylaws or was deliberately misrepresenting them. Sarah was printing out the documents when she heard a commotion outside. She looked out her front window to see Margaret standing in her driveway, speaking to a small group of neighbors. Sarah couldn't hear what was being said, but Margaret was gesturing animatedly towards Sarah's house. She grabbed her phone and started recording from behind her curtains. Margaret was holding up what looked like photos and pointing at Sarah's backyard. The neighbors' people Sarah didn't recognize from the immediate area were nodding seriously as Margaret spoke. She's hosted multiple large gatherings without proper permits, Margaret was saying, her voice carrying across the quiet street. The noise, the crowds, the unsupervised children, it's becoming a real safety concern for the neighborhood. One of the neighbors, an elderly man Sarah had never seen before, spoke up. What kind of crowds are we talking about? 30, 40 people at a time. Cars parked everywhere, music until late at night. People drinking and jumping in the pool without any lifeguards present. Sarah's jaw dropped. Her pool party had included maybe 15 people total, all neighbors she'd personally invited. The music had been turned off by 8 p.m., and the only drinks served were lemonade and iced tea. Are you sure about those numbers? Asked another neighbor, a woman with graying hair. I have documentation, Margaret said, holding up a manila folder. Photos, noise level measurements, witness statements. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a threat to our community's character. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She marched outside, her phone still recording. Excuse me, she called out, walking down her driveway. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you talking about my pool party? Margaret's face flushed, but she quickly composed herself. Sarah, I was just informing concerned neighbors about the ongoing situation. What ongoing situation? I had one small gathering for 15 people, all of whom live in this neighborhood. Sarah woke to the sound of her security system alarm blaring at 3:17 a.m. She bolted upright, her heart hammering as she grabbed her phone from the nightstand. The security app showed motion detected in her backyard, multiple alerts from the pool area. "Sophia, stay in your room," she called out as she threw on clothes and grabbed the baseball bat she kept by her bedroom door. Through her bedroom window, she could see the pool lights reflecting off the water, but everything looked normal. The motion alerts had stopped, but Sarah's hands trembled as she reviewed the security footage on her phone. The infrared cameras showed a figure moving around her pool at 3:15 a.m., but the image was too dark and grainy to make out any details. She called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone was in my backyard. My security system detected an intruder near my pool. Are they still there, ma'am? Sarah peered out her window again. The backyard was empty and still. I don't think so, but I have it on camera. We'll send an officer to check the area. Please stay inside until they arrive. 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez walked the perimeter of Sarah's property with a flashlight, checking for signs of forced entry or damage. Sarah watched from her back patio, still clutching the baseball bat. I don't see any obvious signs of break-in, he said, returning to where Sarah stood. Your gate is still locked, and there's no damage to your fence. Could have been an animal. That triggered the motion sensors. The footage shows a person, not an animal. Can you show me? Sarah pulled up the security app and played the 3:15 a.m. footage. Officer Rodriguez studied the grainy image, squinting at the dark figure moving. Around the pool area, hard to make out much detail, he said, but it does look like someone was back there. Any idea who might want to mess with your property? Sarah hesitated. Accusing Margaret without proof would sound petty, but the timing was too convenient. To ignore, I've been having a dispute with my HOA president. She's been harassing me about my pool. HOA dispute. Huh. Officer Rodriguez looked sympathetic. I've seen those get pretty ugly. Any direct threats? Yesterday she told me I had no idea what I was dealing with and that her patience had limits. That's pretty vague, but I'll include it in my report. I'd recommend upgrading your security cameras if you can afford it. These infrared images aren't going to hold up if you need to press charges. After Officer Rodriguez left, Sarah couldn't get back to sleep. She sat in her kitchen, staring out at the pool, wondering what Margaret had been doing in her backyard. The thought of someone creeping around her property while she and Sophia slept made her skin crawl. At 6 a.m., she walked outside to inspect the pool area in daylight. Everything looked normal. The water was clear, the equipment was functioning. The patio furniture was exactly where she'd left it. But something felt wrong. She was about to go back inside when she noticed muddy footprints on the pool deck. The prints were small, about a size 7 shoe, and they led from the back fence to the pool equipment area and back again. Sarah took photos of the footprints with her phone, then followed the trail to see where it led. The prints were clearest near the pool's filtration system, where someone had apparently spent several minutes examining the equipment. Her blood ran cold as she realized what Margaret might have been doing. Sarah immediately called Miguel, her pool contractor. Miguel, I need you to come over right away. I think someone tampered with my pool equipment. What kind of tampering? I don't know yet, but someone was in my backyard at 3 a.m., and there are footprints all around the filtration system. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't touch anything. While waiting for Miguel, Sarah called Tom Bradford and left a voicemail explaining the situation. She also called her security company to inquire about upgrading her cameras. The package you have now is our basic plan, the customer service representative explained. For an additional $50 a month, we can install high-definition cameras with night vision and facial recognition capabilities. Do it, Sarah said, without hesitation. How soon can you install them? We have an opening this afternoon. Miguel arrived looking grim. He'd dealt with pool sabotage before, he explained, usually involving vindictive neighbors or disgruntled contractors. Most people don't realize how easy it is to damage a pool system in ways that won't be immediately obvious, he said. He spent 45 minutes examining every component of the pool equipment, checking chemical levels, inspecting pumps and filters, and testing the electrical connections. I found it, he said finally, his voice tight with anger. "Someone poured sand into your filter system." Sand. "About 10 pounds of it, I'd guess. It's not immediately dangerous, but it would have clogged your filtration system within a few days. The pump would have burned out trying to push water through the blockage, and you'd be looking at thousands of dollars in repairs." Sarah felt sick. "Can you fix it?" "I can clean it out, but it's going to take most of the day." And Sarah, Miguel looked at her seriously. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. This is the kind of sabotage that looks like equipment failure, unless you know what to look for. So they were trying to make it look like my pool was poorly built or poorly maintained. Either way, it would have cost you a fortune to fix, and you probably would have had to drain and refill the entire pool. As Miguel began the process of cleaning out the filtration system, Sarah felt her anger building. Margaret had snuck into her backyard in the middle of the night and deliberately sabotaged her pool. This had moved far beyond HOA harassment into criminal territory. Her phone rang. It was Tom Bradford. "Sarah, I got your message. This is serious. Breaking and entering, destruction of property. We need to file a police report immediately. I already called the police last night, but they said there wasn't enough evidence. The sand in your filter system is evidence. Evidence. The timing after your confrontation with Margaret is evidence. We're going to press charges. What if she denies it? Then we make her prove she wasn't there. Security footage, alibi, phone records. She did this. There will be a trail." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was taking Margaret's harassment seriously, but her relief was short-lived. As she hung up with Tom, she noticed Sophia standing at the sliding glass door, still in her pajamas, staring at the pool equipment scattered across the deck. "Mom, why is Miguel taking apart our pool?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's eye level. "Someone played a mean trick on us, sweetheart. Miguel is fixing it." "What kind of trick?" "They put sand where it wasn't supposed to go. But don't worry, everything will be fine." Sophia's face scrunched up with concern. "Was it the mean lady who came over the other day?" Sarah's heart ached. Even an 80-year-old could see what was happening. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to find out." As the day progressed, Sarah began to realize the full scope of Margaret's plan. The sand sabotage wasn't just about causing expensive damage, it was about creating a situation where Sarah's pool would become unusable, forcing her to either spend a fortune on repairs or face ongoing equipment failures. Margaret had probably expected Sarah to blame the contractor, the equipment manufacturer, or her own maintenance routine. The last thing she'd expected was for Sarah to immediately suspect sabotage and call in an expert. At 2 p.m., while Miguel was still working on the filtration system, Sarah received another official-looking letter from the HOA. This one was even more aggressive than the first. "Ms. Martinez, your failure to respond to our previous violation notice has forced us to escalate this matter. Effective immediately, the HOA is placing a lien on your property for unpaid fines totaling $8,000. Additionally, we are filing a complaint with the county regarding your unpermitted pool operations. Furthermore, recent reports of equipment failures and potential safety hazards have raised serious concerns about your pool's compliance with county health codes. We recommend immediate professional inspection and remediation. The HOA's patience with your known compliance has been exhausted. Legal action will commence within 48 hours unless these violations are immediately resolved." Margaret Thornfield, HOA president, Sarah read the letter twice, her disbelief growing. Margaret was threatening to place a lien on her house based on made-up violations, and now she was somehow aware of equipment failures that had occurred just hours earlier. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Margaret had sabotaged the pool equipment, then sent a letter referencing equipment failures as justification for further harassment. Sarah immediately forwarded the letter to Tom Bradford, then called the county to inquire about any complaints filed against her property. "We don't have any active complaints about your address," the county clerk informed her. "The only recent activity was the inspection earlier this week, which found no violations. So no one has filed a complaint about pool operations or health code violations, not according to our records." Margaret was threatening county action that didn't exist based on equipment failures she had caused herself. It was almost too brazen to believe. But Sarah was beginning to understand that Margaret's arrogance was also her weakness. She was so confident in her ability to manipulate the system that she was making increasingly obvious mistakes. The new security cameras were installed at 4 p.m. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated Margaret's face as she stood frozen beside Sarah's pool. Ankle-deep in murky water, surrounded by dozens of bricks, Officer Rodriguez, the same policeman who had responded to Sarah's earlier call, stepped into the backyard with his hand resting on his radio. "Well, well," he said, taking in the scene. "Looks like we found our midnight visitor." Margaret seemed to snap out of her paralysis. "Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president, and I was investigating reports of safety violations. By dumping construction materials into someone's pool at 11 o'clock at night," Officer Rodriguez's voice was dry with disbelief. "The pool was already contaminated. I was collecting evidence of improper maintenance, ma'am. I'm going." "To stop you right there," Officer Rodriguez said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use that right." Sarah watched from her patio as Margaret was arrested, still clutching her phone with the damning video evidence. The surreal nature of the moment hadn't fully hit her yet. 3 hours ago, she'd been sleeping peacefully. And now she was watching her HOA president being read her Miranda rights in her backyard. "Ms. Martinez," Officer Rodriguez called out after securing Margaret in his patrol car. "I'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to file a formal complaint and provide your video evidence. This looks like breaking and entering, destruction of property, and possibly stalking given the pattern of behavior. What happens to her tonight? She'll be booked and held until her arraignment. Given that this appears to be an escalation of ongoing harassment, the judge will probably set a substantial bail." As the police car disappeared into the night, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She sank into one of her patio chairs, staring at the bricks scattered across the bottom of her pool like dark stones in a disturbed pond. Her phone rang. It was Tom Bradford. "Sarah, are you okay? I heard the arrest on the police scanner." "She's gone. They arrested her." Sarah's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "Tom, she destroyed my pool. There are bricks everywhere. Take photos, save all the video footage, keep records of every expense this causes you. We're going to make sure she pays for every penny of damage. This feels like a nightmare. It's going to get better now. People like Margaret depend on their victims being too intimidated to fight back. But you fought back, and now she's facing serious criminal charges." The next morning, Sarah dropped Sophia off at her sister's house before heading to the police station. She didn't want her daughter to see the pool in its current state or to be exposed to the legal proceedings that were about to unfold. Detective Maria Santos, Officer Rodriguez's partner, reviewed Sarah's evidence in a small conference room that smelled of stale coffee and institutional disinfectant. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases I've seen," Detective Santos said, watching the security footage on Sarah's phone. "Usually with neighbor disputes. It's he said, she said, with no solid evidence. But this, she might as well have signed a confession. What charges is she facing? Breaking and entering, destruction of property, stalking, harassment, making false reports to government agencies." Detective Santos ticked off each charge on her fingers. "The DA might add more, depending on what else we find." "What do you mean? People who escalate to this level of criminal behavior usually have a history. We're going to look into other complaints against her, both here and wherever she lived before. I suspect you're not her first victim." The detective's prediction proved accurate within hours. By the time Sarah left the police station, 3 other Maple Ridge residents had come forward with stories of harassment and intimidation by Margaret Thornfield. David Garcia, whose lawn had supposedly been half an inch too tall, revealed that Margaret had actually been taking photos of his property at dawn and dusk, trying to catch his sprinkler system running during restricted hours. When she couldn't find any violations, she'd submitted a complaint claiming his grass violated community standards. The Patel family shared emails showing Margaret had threatened to report them to immigration authorities if they didn't remove a cultural statue from their front yard, a statue that violated no HOA rules whatsoever. Most disturbing was the account from Jennifer Walsh, a widow who lived on the far end of the neighborhood. Margaret had been pressuring her to sell her house, claiming that her failure to maintain modern landscaping standards was bringing down property values. When Jennifer refused, Margaret had begun calling the county to report imaginary code violations, forcing Jennifer to pay for multiple unnecessary inspections. "She's been terrorizing half the neighborhood," Tom Bradford told Sarah that afternoon. "The DA is treating this as a pattern of criminal harassment, not just an isolated incident. I can't believe I'm the only one who fought back." "You're not just the only one who fought back, you're the only one who had the resources to fight back effectively." Jennifer Walsh is on a fixed income. The Garcias both work 2 jobs and don't speak English as their first language. The Patels were afraid that challenging an HOA president might somehow affect their immigration status. Sarah felt a surge of anger at Margaret's calculated targeting of vulnerable residents. She picked people she thought couldn't defend themselves. "Exactly, but she miscalculated with you. You had the money for security cameras, the knowledge to call a lawyer, and the determination to document everything." That afternoon, Sarah received a call from Miguel about the pool repairs. "The good news is that the bricks didn't damage the pool structure," he said. "The bad news is that we're going to have to drain the entire pool, clean everything, and refill it. The water is contaminated with brick dust and debris." "How much will that cost?" "About $3,000, plus the cost of the earlier Sabotage repair. Total damage is probably close to $5,000. Sarah winced. Even with insurance, she was looking at significant out-of-pocket expenses. But Tom had assured her that Margaret would be liable for every penny through civil court. As word of Margaret's arrest spread through the neighborhood, Sarah's phone began ringing constantly. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up were now sharing their own stories of Margaret's overreach and intimidation. "She told me I couldn't park my work truck in my own driveway," said Mike Henderson, Janet's ex-husband who worked in construction. "Claimed it violated the aesthetic standards of the community. When I ignored her, she started leaving violation notices on my windshield every morning. She tried to get my home daycare shut down," added Rosa Morales from 3 blocks over. "Filed complaints with the state, claiming I was running an unlicensed business, even though I had all the proper permits." The stories painted a picture of systematic abuse of power that had been building for months. Margaret had used her position as HOA president to target anyone who crossed her or didn't fit her vision of what the neighborhood should look like. But the most shocking revelation came from Janet Henderson, who had been going through old emails from the HOA. "Sarah, you need to see this," Janet said, appearing at Sarah's front door with a laptop. "I found something in the HOA records that Margaret probably hoped no one would notice." Janet opened her laptop and showed Sarah a series of financial documents. "Look at the HOA account balances from before Margaret became president, and then look at them now." Sarah studied the numbers, her confusion growing. "I don't understand. What am I looking at?" The HOA had about $50,000 in reserves when Margaret took over. Now there's less than $10,000. Where did the money go? That's the question. Margaret's been approving consulting fees and legal expenses that don't seem to correspond to any actual work being done. Janet pointed to a series of payments. "Look at this. She paid herself $8,000 for community management consulting last month." Sarah stared at the screen. "She's been embezzling from the HOA. It looks like it. And if she's been stealing money, that would explain why she's been so aggressive about finding violations and fines. She needs to generate revenue to cover up the missing funds." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Margaret's obsession with Sarah's pool wasn't just about power or control, it was about money. She'd been embezzling from the HOA and needed to create a crisis that would justify increased fees and fines. Sarah immediately forwarded the financial information to Detective Santos and Tom Bradford. Within hours, the investigation had expanded beyond simple harassment to include embezzlement and fraud. "This changes everything," Tom told Sarah over the phone. "If she's been stealing from the HOA, we're looking at federal charges. The FBI might get involved. Federal charges, mail fraud, wire fraud, potentially RICO violations. If this was part of a larger scheme, Margaret Thornfield isn't just looking at a few months in county jail anymore. She could be facing years in federal prison." That evening, as Sarah sat in her backyard watching Miguel's crew begin draining the pool, she reflected on how quickly everything had changed. A week ago, her biggest concern had been planning a neighborhood barbecue. Now she was at the center of a criminal investigation that could send her HOA president to federal prison. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, 3 days after Margaret's arrest, Sarah was reviewing insurance paperwork when Detective Santos called with news that would change everything. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come to the station this afternoon? And you might want to bring your lawyer?" "What's wrong? Did something happen with the charges?" "Something happened, but not what you'd expect. We found out who Margaret Thornfield really is." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What do you mean, just come in? This is bigger than we thought." 2 hours later, Sarah sat in Detective Santos's office with Tom Bradford, staring at a file folder that seemed to contain more documents than should be possible for one person's criminal history. "Margaret Elizabeth Thornfield doesn't exist," Detective Santos said without preamble. "The woman you know as your HOA president is actually Margaret Elizabeth Morrison, and she's wanted by the FBI for running real estate fraud schemes across 3 states. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. Real estate fraud. She targets upscale, suburban communities, gets herself elected to HOA boards, then systematically embezzles funds while creating artificial crises to justify increased fees and assessments. Detective Santos spread out a series of photographs showing Margaret at different locations over the past 5 years. Phoenix, Austin, Charlotte, same pattern every time. Tom Bradford leaned forward. "How long has she been in Maple Ridge?" "About 18 months. Long enough to get elected HOA president and start the embezzlement process, but not long enough to complete the full scheme before moving on." "What's the full scheme?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Detective Santos pulled out a thick report. "She identifies communities with significant reserve funds and gets herself elected to positions of financial authority. Then she begins a process of manufactured crisis violations, harassment, fake safety concerns, anything to justify emergency assessments and increased fees. While embezzling the money that's supposed to address these fake problems," Tom added, "exactly, but here's the really sophisticated part. She targets specific homeowners for intensive harassment, forcing them to either pay substantial fines or sell their properties at below-market prices." Sarah stared at the detective. "She was trying to force me to sell." "We think so. The pattern fits perfectly. Create an untenable situation for a homeowner with a valuable property. Make their life miserable with constant violations and harassment. Then either collect massive fines or pressure them into a distressed sale. But who would buy it?" Detective Santos smiled grimly. "She had a business partner in each city, someone who would purchase distressed properties at below-market prices, then flip them for substantial profits. We're still tracking down her Maple Ridge connection. But we suspect someone was waiting in the wings to make you an offer you couldn't refuse." The scope of the deception was staggering. Sarah had thought she was dealing with a power-hungry neighbor. Instead, she'd been targeted by a professional criminal running a sophisticated real estate fraud operation. "How much money are we talking about?" Tom asked. "In Phoenix, they estimate she stole over $200,000 from the HOA and forced the sale of 8 properties at below-market prices. Austin was similar. Charlotte was where she got careless, and we first identified the pattern." "So I wasn't paranoid," Sarah said quietly. "She really was trying to destroy my life. You were her primary target in Maple Ridge. Your property is worth about $400,000. But in a distressed sale, she could have forced you to accept $300,000 or less, split the difference with her business partner, and they're looking at a $50,000 profit just from your house." Sarah felt sick. The harassment, the fake violations, the sabotage, it had all been calculated to force her into financial ruin so Margaret could profit from her desperation. "There's more," Detective Santos continued. "We found evidence that she was planning to escalate significantly. Your pool incident wasn't random. Vandalism, it was the beginning of a campaign designed to make your property unlivable." The detective showed Sarah a notebook found in Margaret's car during her arrest. The pages contained detailed plans for escalating harassment, contaminating the pool with chemicals that would require expensive remediation, filing false reports about structural damage that would require costly inspections, and even plans to damage Sarah's home's electrical system in ways that would look like maintenance failures. "She was going to destroy my house," Sarah whispered. "She was going to make it so expensive to live there that you'd have no choice but to sell. And her business partner would have been waiting with a cash offer to help you out of your predicament." Tom Bradford shook his head in disbelief. "This is RICO territory. Organized criminal enterprise, wire fraud, mail fraud, extortion. The FBI task force agrees. They're taking over the case as of tomorrow. Margaret Morrison is looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison, and they're going after her business partners in every city where she operated. As Sarah absorbed this information, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but Detective Santos motioned for her to answer. Sarah Martinez. This is Robert Chen from Channel 7 News. I understand you were the victim in the HOA fraud case that broke today. Would you be willing to do an interview about your experience? Sarah looked at Detective Santos, who nodded encouragingly. How did you find out about this? The FBI held a press conference an hour ago. Your case broke open a multi-state criminal enterprise. You're being credited with stopping one of the most sophisticated HOA fraud schemes ever documented. Sarah felt surreal. She'd just wanted to enjoy her pool with her daughter. Now she was apparently a crime-fighting hero. I'll call you back, she told the reporter. Over the next week, the story exploded across local and national media. HOA president arrested in multi-state fraud scheme. Read the headlines. Single mothers' security cameras expose criminal enterprise. The pool that brought down a crime ring? Sarah found herself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight as neighbors. Reporters and law enforcement officials praised her for refusing to be intimidated. The security footage of Margaret dumping bricks into her pool became a symbol of bureaucratic abuse and criminal overreach. But the most satisfying moment came when Sarah received a call from Jennifer Walsh, the elderly widow Margaret had been terrorizing. I wanted to thank you, Jennifer said, her voice shaky with emotion. I was going to sell my house. I couldn't afford to keep fighting her, and I thought maybe she was right, maybe I was too old to maintain my property properly. Jennifer, there was never anything wrong with your property. She was a criminal trying to steal your home. Know that now, but Sarah, you saved my house. You saved all of our houses. If you hadn't fought back, she would have destroyed this entire neighborhood. The financial recovery was swift and comprehensive. The FBI had frozen Margaret's assets and those of her business partners across multiple states. Sarah received full restitution for her pool damage, plus additional compensation for emotional distress and the violation of her privacy. The HOA's stolen funds were recovered and returned with interest. Margaret's victims in other cities were also receiving restitution as the criminal enterprise was dismantled piece by piece. But the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks after Margaret's arrest, when Sarah stood in her backyard watching Sophia play in the crystal-clear pool. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, unmarred by bricks or sabotage. The new security cameras provided peace of mind, but they were no longer needed. Morrison was in federal custody, awaiting trial, and her network of criminal associates was being systematically prosecuted. Miguel had outdone himself with the pool restoration. The new filtration system was even better than the original, and he'd added features that made the water cleaner and clearer than ever before. Mom, can we have another pool party? Sophia asked, floating on her unicorn raft. Absolutely, sweetheart. But this time, we're only inviting people we actually like. As if summoned by the mention of a party, Janet Henderson appeared at the fence, holding a plate of homemade cookies. Celebration treats, she announced. I heard the FBI recovered everything Margaret stole, plus penalties, more than recovered, Sarah said, accepting the cookies gratefully. They're saying the restitution payments will be enough to upgrade the whole neighborhood's infrastructure. New playground equipment, repaved roads, maybe even a community pool. A community pool. Janet laughed. The irony is perfect. Margaret wanted access to your pool so badly that she ended up giving the whole neighborhood a pool. That evening, as Sarah tucked Sophia into bed, her daughter asked the question that had been on her mind all week. Mom, why did that lady try to hurt us? Sarah chose her words carefully. Some people think they can take things that don't belong to them by scaring others or being mean. But when good people stand up to bullies, the bullies usually get caught. Are you a good person? Mom, I try to be, sweetheart, and I will always protect our family and our home and our pool, especially our pool. 6 months later, Sarah received a final piece of correspondence related to the case. It was a handwritten letter from Margaret Morrison, sent from the federal correctional facility where she was serving her 28th TA.